Just met up with Nick. As he stated, his long range weather forecast for the last 4 years has been absolutely spot on for not getting wet or that cold. Unfortunately, getting wet and cold is always a good way of getting ducks, from what he said. So at least we won't be cold when we spend a few hours watching the sunrise and having a chat, which is no loss. I'm happy with that. Nick, sorry to blind you.
That's my night vision gone.
What's the plan this morning?
The plan this morning is off the seawall, out across the mud flats. We'll be going about a mile and a half out to a particular spot adjacent to one of the high islands. And the theory is that there is a mallard flight between one particular place and another, basically, and also with a reasonable expectation that the Canadas will flight through a little bit later when the sun comes up. That's the plan. I've just noticed you haven't got a bag, which means that if we shoot more than one Canada apiece, this bag's going to get bloody heavy.
They call me a wise man for no reason, other than this.
Yes, if you shoot Canadas, get someone else to carry them.
Bring your mate.
Looks like it's my turn.
Do you have your broad gloves?
No.
You are, don't you?
Oh, well hard.
It's nippy.
It is.
But it's 10 degrees warmer than it could have been yesterday.
Absolutely. And it's, although the wind is from the, northeast-ish, or due north, in fact, I think, it's gone up 2 or 3 degrees from yesterday. The temperature's above freezing, which is balmy by comparison. I mean, it's in the sense that I've always used a side-by-side. I went over to a semi-automatic right back at the beginning of the earliest days when steel was first mooted, which was back in the 1980s. I've used one ever since. In fact, the other day I was out on the shore and I had this with me, which of course only got a 3-inch chamber. I missed the extra little bit of range and knockdown power that you get with a 3.5-inch cartridge, which of course is usually best fired through a semi-automatic if you want to keep the fillings in your teeth.
What is that range difference?
Whether it's real or imagined, I would say a good 10 yards.
45 to 55.
I would say 40 to 50. But it's the difference between a commercially loaded 3-inch cartridge with, say, number 3 or number 1 shot, and in my case, what you can achieve with a home-loaded cartridge with BBs in it, and that absolutely poleaxes Canadas. If you hit them square at, a good 45 yards.
You own an over and under, Nick?
I don't possess one, no. I did. I have owned a couple. Yes, I went across to the dark side for a while.
And then realised that's the good and honest way of shooting.
Fashion's always an interesting thing, isn't it?
We all follow whatever the world champs are using.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't find any difference in the shooting of it between a side-by-side and semi-automatic like anything else. You point it in the right direction and it works. The thing I was not overly impressed with was the handling of an over and under, particularly one of the B guns that I had, which had about the same handling characteristics as a railway sleeper, and it was not a big heavy gun.
I think that might just be a you thing. I'd say the market would disagree somewhat.
Indeed, the market probably would disagree, but having said that, one of the things, and this is an age thing, I kind of grew up with shooting almost totally knackered, but once good quality English guns, hammer guns, side locks, and wildfowling guns as well. Yes, I kind of, as time passed, I went from shooting guns that had been made by master craftsmen, perfectly balanced, and virtually shot themselves, to over and unders which had been built basically to fire lots of cartridges within a relatively confined arc using quite punchy cartridges time after time after time after time after time. And I didn't find that they moved with anything like the same fluidity and grace.
A lot more predictability though, which is
Indeed, if you're just
a selling point.
if you're just into the mechanics of clay shooting, of course. But
I think there are some fine over and unders. Like, in fact, there's some great over and unders that shoot very, very well as well. But if you're coming from best side locks, most things will feel a little less like.
yes, and of course, I'll be the first to say that my own experience of the upper end of the over and under market is pretty limited. You know, back in the day when I was, you know, kind of deciding what it was that I liked gun-wise, a lot of these of the current makers of good quality Spanish and Italian over and unders didn't exist, or if they didn't exist, their products were not being brought into this country. So yes, I'm always open to re-education if the manufacturer of a quality gun wants to lend me one, I'll happily give it a go. But I was
Lend you a gun of appropriate quality.
This is really nothing special. It's still tight in the action, and I've taken it out a couple of times, which is all I managed pigeon shooting last year, and I was more than happy with the results. There was a few misses. The vast majority of whatever flew past within sensible range ended up on the floor.
You can't ask more than that. And it's worthless by most people's standards in
Yeah,
this country.
it's I'm not into it for an arm and a leg. This is dire, isn't it?
I know, I've seen 4 goals now.
Yeah, 4 goals.
All at about 400 yards as well. That's it is silent.
It is, isn't it? I mean, you know, joking apart, there's not a Brent, there's nothing. I think it is the curse of the camera.
I think it's just you having me on 5 years of drive.
Well, yes, I mean, it is, isn't it? And it's we're now at the point where this is embarrassing, and as I'm sure you can appreciate, I wouldn't go to all the trouble of coming out here if I didn't think that it was going to be worth it. Because, you know, I don't need the exercise, and
Your doctor might disagree.
yeah, well, cumulatively, I've probably spent decades out here, one way and another. You know, I could easily miss a completely unrewarding trip like this. Yeah, still, again, I'll trot out the now slightly worn excuse of when you've got to plan a fowling trip through no, you know, just because of attendant circumstances, right at the back of the season, 2 weeks in advance, unless you're very lucky, the chances of striking it right are significantly reduced.
We'll perhaps plan a little better next time. But we've said that for a while now.
Well, yes, I mean, with the boat, there's the opportunity to visit all sorts of places that you would not normally get to. I mean, most of our own club members have never shot that island over there, never been there, simply because the only way that you can get there is by boat.
Now, the last person that went there is still there.
No.
Both boat dragged
shot
up on the side.
Shot himself with the boredom.
3 seasons of wildfowling. And just about got to double figures on goals, 13.
Yeah.
What is your success rate, generally speaking? That's a good question.
Mine on wildfowl,
Yeah, percentage-wise.
my own success rate is not high because a lot of the time I just don't bother. I'm no longer overly worried about getting birds in the bag. A lot of the time I'm taking out new members. If I'm not taking out new members, I will often go to where it's most convenient, just so that I can watch the sunrise, kind of thing, rather than you know, go to a spot where there's a better chance of getting something. But one of our lads who does completely the reverse, which is he mentally tracks the passage of every Canada goose and duck that flies over a couple of particular points. He will pick the tide conditions, the weather conditions, because like me, he only lives literally within a couple of miles of the marsh. He does a lot of evening flights, which are probably more productive than the morning flights, but just don't suit me for a variety of reasons. And he'll probably have a 75% success rate.
It's pretty tasty.
Yes, and when you consider that, this is wildfowling on the south coast, one of the most densely populated areas in the country, etc., etc. His success rate is every bit the equal of people on I say public marshes. These aren't public marshes, but on significantly
wilder.
Yes, the areas
less Portsmouth.
Exactly, less in someone's back garden like this is. But the actual number of birds that they tally up with at the end of the season is, in many instances, less than he gets. So it's a clumsy way of making the point that the shooting here can be occasionally spectacular and often enough to keep you happy if wildfowling, as indeed it is, consists of bagging 1 or 2 birds per flight. If you're expecting more than that, then you need to adjust your expectations, because that's probably not going to happen.
Well, my expectations are generally 0, but it's nice to come out and catch up, mate.
Yes, yeah. Sadly, not so nice to have that confirmed. That
Oh, I know they're here. We've seen them in the distance many times. Another successful trip to the marsh.
Absolutely.
We'd present all of our hundreds of dead wildfowl to you, but it would be distasteful to share
Yes.
the quantity with which we just bagged.
It would have been like one of these American Yahoo butchery, up and at 'em, 9 guns at a time.
I did yell, send them to Jesus at one point.
Yes, indeed. Entirely, sadly, to yourself, because there was not a single bloody bird in sight. Having walked all the way out there and all the way back, we saw 2 Canada geese come into the marsh as we were vacating it, and I think that was about all we saw all day long.
It wasn't a hot morning for wildfowl, but as you've seen, we had a wonderful conversation for 3 hours.
Yes.
Which is never bad time. It's never time wasted.
No, and the backdrop was spectacular. As I said earlier, it never ceases to amaze me that you can be within a mile of getting on for 500,000 people and yet be in an area which the number of people that have walked across it, for instance, in the last couple of years, you could count on the fingers of one hand.
It's pretty special.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that we said on camera and a lot of things we didn't record, and we're here firstly to look at your gun, maybe secondly, but firstly, curlew. You used to be able to shoot curlew legally. He doesn't shoot them illegally now.
I gather that you filmed a film which I, and I'm sure others have seen, on the breeding or the release of curlew. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was up on the South Downs.
Yeah.
Was it the Cowdrey estate?
Arundel.
Arundel estate. Yeah.
Which is a lovely project.
Yes.
Really lovely project. However, you used to eat them.
Yes.
When there were many and they were abundant.
And they were significantly more abundant, and talk of the population crash has a particular relevance for me, because I can remember the days when they were shot, and although they received protection under the 1981 Wildlife and Countryside Act, the transition through Parliament, which had wildfowlers on the edge of their seats for months, first of all it was protected, then it wasn't protected, then it was, then it wasn't, and then finally it was protected, and here we are. But even then, its numbers have sadly plummeted. I noticed in a local paper the other day that a woman in the New Forest was prosecuted for allowing her dog basically to disturb the nests of curlew.
And rightly so.
Absolutely, because it's in the south of England, the New Forest is one of the last, I said strongholds, it's hardly a stronghold, but for someone to willfully ignore the legislation, and it's my understanding that she'd been advised before what the likely effect was, and she just ignored it, and her dog was running around snaffling up the nests of eggs.
Dogs are the biggest predator on the forest, which I find quite an interesting thing. And what's interesting as well, up in the uplands where they're doing a great job saving these wild ground nesting birds, dogs are the biggest predator there because people just let them off a lead and they go for it.
Yes.
How do they taste? That's a big question.
Yeah. Yes. I'm trying to. It's always difficult to describe a taste. They have a powerful flavour, which is reminiscent of samphire, marsh grass, mud, and salt water. And that doesn't sound particularly appetising, but
if you described an oyster, it would sound absolutely disgusting.
Indeed, yes. But a good curlew, and the female is significantly larger than the male, a good curlew shot early in the season and had been on the south coast long enough for it to have established what is their usual feeding pattern, which is they mess about on the mud flats and they probe and dither, but they feed mostly inland on wet fields for worms. And the consequence of that is that their meat is quite pleasant tasting, even though it does have that unmistakable aroma of salt marsh and estuary.
That's pretty special.
It is, but better than that I can't do. And I can't think of a way that you could legitimately acquire a curlew these days.
There will be a country somewhere where you're allowed to shoot them, that much I do
know.
Well,
you used to be able to shoot them in Northern Ireland, but I'm pretty sure that they've changed that because some years ago I really fancied, didn't want to shoot many, but I wanted to shoot a brace of curlew and have them roasted, as I can remember as a kid of 16, taking up wildfowling for the first time when curlew made up a significant part of the bag, just to relive and savour that flavour before I get too much older and the whiskey utterly destroys all my taste buds.
Final question on curlew, because it's potentially upsetting, shouldn't be. Sporting wise, I can't imagine there's a great deal of sport in a curlew, having watched thousands of them flitting around the place.
Incredibly deceptive. Eyes like a hawk. You have to, or had to, keep absolutely still. They have, for a biggish bird, I mean, a curlew's wingspan is like this, and as I say, the females are bigger than the males, and you know, with a beak yay long, it's a big old bird. They had a propensity to carry shot like nobody's business, but that's another issue. They can jink on a sixpence. It's a bit like a wood pigeon. They can virtually turn around and not about fly backwards, but they can change direction with tremendous alacrity. And many's the curlew that by the time the charge of shot has got where it was, the curlew's gone somewhere else completely. They feed over the back of the hill. They'll go inland 4, 5, 10 miles to find a wet field to probe and eat worms, and a bit like woodcock. I mean, I've shot curlew in the distant past, and when you picked them up, they've got earthworms spilling out of their mouth. So, no doubt about what they're eating at all. But they really were testing shots. And again, for a bird that's kind of roughly a similar proportion to pheasant, you'd want to be using number 4s on a curlew in order to knock.
Lead 4s.
This was lead 4s in order to knock them down good and proper.
Weren't the olden days fun?
They certainly were, and like so many things in life, it's the old saying, you don't know what you had till it's gone.
All right, on that note, guns.
Yes.
This is the gun?
Yes, it's probably had a couple of hundred steel cartridges, again, mostly 2 3/4, 28 grams of 5s, which I've been using for pigeon shooting, a box maybe of 3-inch magnums, and some more of the Ely VIP 70mm cartridges in a variety of shot sizes. You know, they work perfectly when you point them in the right direction. I just wondered, this would be probably the 5th or 6th time that you've inspected it. Each time you've mic'd it up, there's been no difference in the barrels.
I really don't feel the need to mic it up at this point.
And
another 200 isn't magically going to start wearing it.
My sort of suggestion would be, with your expert eye, just to have a look up the barrel and see if you can detect anything that...
growth in the bulge.
Yes.
No, little ring bulge is still there right at the end, isn't it, on the left barrel?
Yep.
Which is completely aesthetic. Other than that, like, I was expecting to see maybe some wear on the forcing cones or something, but no, it's nothing.
And again, I mean, this is straight off the marsh, literally, without having been cleaned, so...
But luckily there was no shots put through the insides, it's just the outside been
That's it, yes. Because that, I suppose, is part of the equation, that with a wildfowling gun and still shot, you do actually have to fire the cartridges.
Perhaps we should have given it to
a better wildfowler.
A luckier one.
Luckier, yes. I think luck has got a lot to do with it. And as I remarked earlier, I'm notorious for the weather conspiring against me, and birds just seeing me and flying in the opposite direction. Whether that's because they are somehow telepathically aware of my extreme prowess with a shotgun.
No, you're just a Jonah.
Yeah. If I could, I'd probably be walking around with an albatross hanging around my neck.
I mean, you do look a bit like an ancient mariner.
Yes, I can see that.
I mean, that was the quickest segment we've ever done on that gun. It's fine.
It works, and I mean, it goes bang. Everything else works. It's still tight. There's no cosmetic damage to it. I mean, it's kind of soused in spray at the moment because obviously it was going out on the marsh, but got the same few cabinet dings on it. And as we've frequently said, it is made of chocolate. The metal, the hardness of the metal is extremely soft.
Lower quality.
Much lower quality than your average, for instance, AYA, which is why my other 2 AYAs, which have also had significant amounts of steel shot through them, show no sign of damage, no bulging, no nothing to the barrels.
It is an interesting one. Steel has come a long way since we first started having these conversations.
It has.
I now use it all the time and don't think that there's those whole hydro wads knock things down like...
Yeah.
I can't tell the difference, and I get occasional phone calls from friends being like, "Oh, I'm not sure on these." I'm like, I mean, perhaps a shooting lesson might be in order.
Yeah, and I think the times when that is apparent are frequent. I can think of many people, watch them virtually empty a cartridge belt of steel cartridges and, kind of metaphorically throw them in the mud and tread them in, only to think, well, if you'd asked me, I can tell you what the problem is. You're missing the target. You're not hitting it, which is why they don't work.
It's age-old problem.
Yes.
Probably said this about stones. No, this slingshot's terrible.
Yeah, this arrow doesn't work.
This spear isn't quite good.
Yes.
Yeah. So, gun done. Where's this new in the land of Nick? Any predictions?
I don't know about predictions yet. There's a bit of reflecting to be done, which is probably not quite finished, in that the season for us, wildfowling, we've had no major incidents. Touch wood, there's a week left for our season, which for us ends at the end of January.
Avian influenza wasn't a big...
Well, that's what I was going to come on to. Okay. Yes, yeah. Avian influenza was a significant player right across the board. Where to begin? Many of your viewers will be familiar with it and how it's impinged upon game shooting. Mm-hmm. The effect that it's had on wildfowling has been slightly different because they're wild birds. They're not subject to the same restrictions as game birds were, but there is a whole tranche of legislation that pertains to them. I won't bore you with the numbers of it, but where it kind of goes is that if you have a confirmed outbreak in an area and more than X number of given species are found and proven to have, by clinical examination, to have died from avian influenza, then an order can be made to close shooting in that area. But of course, the reality is that the wording of the legislation, and we tend to forget this, and I'll paraphrase it, says that not only shooting will cease, but all activity will cease.
Interesting.
Which would be, obviously stopping shooting is to prevent disturbance of potentially sick birds, but that also means that dog walkers, windsurfers, yachtsmen, everybody who uses the coastal environment, by virtue of the wording of that legislation, should desist from whatever it is they've been doing. That part of the legislation would be a nightmare to enforce. Indeed, if any mechanism exists to enforce it, I'm not entirely sure. And it has to be said that when we got to the point, have we got to the point? No, we haven't got to that point yet, because I don't want to confuse that with the hard weather ban, which we'll come on to in a minute, and in part the same principle applies. We've been monitoring dead birds in the harbour. One of the interesting things that's thrown up is that, of course, there is no baseline data. Nobody's ever gone round prior to avian flu counting dead birds and giving them any sort of examination as to what they might have died from. So the fact that you find a dead bird now, A, it doesn't mean that it's died from avian influenza, and B, how do the number of birds that you've found recently compare with the non-existent baseline data? So you're in a...
It's not a relevant science, but it's not science.
It's not really science.
It's not a relevant data, but it's not science.
No, a number of things have come from it. One is the fact that the government has taken a very pragmatic view of the whole thing. They treat avian influenza as something which is now endemic in wild and captive flocks of birds. It's not going to go away overnight, and they are not going to overreact in terms of A, testing it, and B, trying to lock the country down or the countryside down, even if it turns out that they're having an outbreak of it, because that would simply not be practicable. Interesting to see that many of the other associations who champion conservation above all else, for instance, those who feed large numbers of wildfowl in very closely contained areas, I'm sure you can think of a couple of large societies that do that. They made no attempt at attracting all those birds into an environment where they might, the bird flu might go through them like a dose of salts. And one wonders whether it's their allegiance to the pound was more important, or the welfare of the birds.
I think a lot of times that is very true when it comes to any kind of nature conservation.
Yes.
Is the animals aren't really the point.
No. At the end of the day, the one of the good things for us as a wildfowling club is that because we've got blokes out on the ground at times, tidal conditions, and like today in locations that the general public can't access, what we've been able to do is to supply, quite fortunate in that we've not had anything like approaching an outbreak of bird flu, although there have been the odd one or twos. But we've established an excellent working relationship with local authorities, the harbour authorities, Uncle Tom Cobley and all, basically as their eyes and ears. And it's put us in a position where we've got X number of members who are out with significant frequency. The local naturalist trust has got one bloke on the ground. Who's going to find more if it's there? So I'm sure we could have all done without it, but from the point of view of raising the profile of the wildfowling community, it's gone extremely well. It is important, I think, in this day and age, to look for every victory that you can, no matter how small, because there's lots of people out there that don't like us.
Cold weather ban.
Yes, cold weather ban.
Before we get on to cold weather ban, avian influenza.
Yes.
Is this something that in your lifetime has been a big deal prior to now, or is this a modern thing?
It's been around for a very long time. Swans have had issues with avian influenza. One of the quoted examples is the swannery at Abbotsbury in Dorset. No national outbreaks of avian influenza, but avian influenza within that particular population, which is very sedentary because they're fed, but also because on tidal waters, swans tend to hang around in the same area, but they also crap on their dinner. They defecate on the ground they are eating from, so you get this cycle of an infection, cross-infection, etc., as one bird effectively eats another one's poo, which, if it's infected, will take it straight inside, and away we go. In one particular area, adjacent to us, about 25 or 30 swans died within a fortnight.
Oh, wow.
And there was swan corpses everywhere, which kind of brings us on to another of the sort of the first world 21st century problems, which is local Facebook residence groups. 20 swans turn up dead on the shore. They've been shot. Wildfowlers are going around shooting swans. No, they're not. And that's led to a lot of work having to be done dealing remotely, as it were, with social media and local residents who see dead birds and immediately think that something nefarious has happened, not that it's the result of a disease.
Animals, wild animals, certainly die a lot.
They do die.
It's pretty crap out there.
Yes.
I think if I lived in the woods, I'd probably die too.
Yes. I mean, geese and swans are big and tough, and a goose 10, 15, 20, 30 years. I think the oldest grey lag is something ridiculous, like about the wild bird, about 38 or 40 years old. So they can live a long time. But equally, like the garden birds, the robin that you see so faithfully in your back garden is highly unlikely to have lived past its third birthday. It's that tough out there. And again, we've got this whole generation of people who are completely detached from the reality of the natural world. We are, of course, converting them one at a time via Facebook.
Fight the good fight, Nick.
Yeah.
Cold weather ban.
Yes, cold weather ban. Hadn't had one for a very long time.
What is a cold weather ban? It gets cold, you're not allowed to shoot anymore.
It gets cold. If it gets really cold, it can affect the condition of birds. We'll talk about on the shore. If the temperature drops too much, either the green marshes, the ground and the water freeze, become too hard, and basically they can't access their food supply. If it gets hard enough to affect the mudflats, which is their backup food supply, so to speak, then they can lose condition very quickly indeed. And in any event, have got no meat on them anyway. Not sporting, one of the reasons behind the suspension process that's been refined over a 30 or 40 year period. It's a lot more equitable now than it was originally. A bit of arm twisting by one or two large bird protection groups had a ban brought in, I say opposition, but in kind of contravention of the legislation that was then in force, because they managed to panic the Secretary of the Environment, who just signed it to get him off his back. Now the system, like I say, much better thought out. My only criticism is that the Met Office, who monitor the weather stations which are geographically placed to best represent areas with a wildfowl population, if you see what I mean. These are not on the top of a mountain kind of thing, and that took a long time to get that done, but it is. We're at the point where once more than half of those certain conditions, then the ban goes through like two effective stages. The first one is you have what is effectively day one, which is when it's all the conditions are applied for. So you're now on the 7-day countdown. I think it's 7 days, whatever the countdown is, to the week prior to the ban, which is the call for restraint, which again is a request for restraint right across the board. Not only shooting, sailing, bait digging, anything else that happens outside, including hiking, jogging, dog walking, etc., should all cease in those areas.
Very localised, these bans?
No, it's national. Right back at one point, they did talk about trying to do it regionally, but that just became impractical. So it's national.
Newcastle's colder than Southampton.
Indeed it is. The argument would be that what then might happen is different birds go through different stages when the weather gets cold. Some will adopt the strategy of we'll sit here, literally not move, use no energy and sit it out. Others will move away from it. So you could have a situation where it's bitterly cold in one place and a significant number of the bird population decides to go to the warmer place.
And there's now 100,000 more birds everywhere.
There's 100,000 birds on the marsh and lots more people shooting them. Commercial flight ponds and things like that would make an absolute killing. It's designed to avoid that, basically. So the latter part of it, once the thing kicks in, there is now more flexibility in terms of its lifting than there was in the past. Once we had a situation where once it was on for 14 days or whatever it was, it stayed on for 14 days irrespective. Now it can be lifted if the conditions...
Yeah, it warms up.
Yeah, if it warms up, there might be a period of a few days to allow them to recover condition, but once they can feed, they will pick up again very quickly indeed. So again, a lot of kind of doom and despondency from certain members of the shooting public. When you look at various forums, it's a bit of a misunderstanding of what the purpose of the thing is, taken in the round, and the system that we've got now is much more effective than it was and has been, and that is largely due to the hard work put in behind the scenes by BASC. Going back to the comment I mentioned earlier, the one thing I would like to see is, as soon as the Met Office issues, day zero, day one, I would like to know when that is, because I've got various things to put in place as the chairman of a wildfowling club in a very sensitive area. It enables me to get ahead of the curve. What I'm not impressed with is the fact that the thing could be heading helter-skelter towards the complicated part of the ban, if you see what I mean, and I might know nothing about it, but I'm hoping that will be changed.
Not too much to ask.
It's not.
Predictions for the year. Well, firstly, did you have a good season?
Always have a good season, but like today, it is no longer dependent upon what I shoot.
The company was fantastic.
Thank you, and you.
Predictions for the year. What do you think is going to face this year? What's on?
Well, bird flu's not going to go away. One of the worries, of course, is that because it is now apparently endemic in the wild bird population, if I stick with that it may resurface when the weather gets warmer. Quite what that means, because of the kind of juxtaposition of different bird populations. What happened last year was when it got into the wild bird population down our way, there were dead gulls, because gull colonies, they nest in colonies, they hang around in big gangs basically. They were able to transmit it from one to the other. And the virus stays alive for up to 130 days in a corpse, which is why it's important to adopt the appropriate biohazard measures if ever you're dealing with them. But it means that gulls, because they're carrion eaters, or can be carrion eaters, when one of their mates keels over with it, they'll eat it and promptly infect themselves. So that's a bit of a vicious circle. Quite how that translates to its transmission, for instance, and it certainly hasn't happened this year, to the local Brent goose population, where the crossover point might be, I don't know. I'm not sure anybody knows, but it hasn't happened this year. Come next September, we'll all know a lot more about it.
That is true.
We've got to the position in this country with politicians where I don't trust any of them. I'm sure that's been the case for many people for a long time. Nothing that they do or say is true anymore. And they still seem to be heavily influenced by extreme left-wing pressure groups. We've got snares with the NGO at the moment. You know, you've got the lunatics from Wild Justice are always thinking up some more nonsense to clog the system with, and sadly, you've got politicians who listen to that clutter, that background noise, not realising that it isn't representative of the vast majority of people in the country, certainly not the people who live and work in the countryside, and certainly not the people who live, work and manage the countryside.
I feel like we could all just move to America or New Zealand if it goes bad. Let's not lift the lid off of politics, because New Zealand is not somewhere. He started it.
New Zealand is not somewhere you'd want to go, although it might be now that Jacinda has vacated that particular sinking ship, and the Canadians may eventually deal with Trudeau. As you know, they're on the verge at the moment in Canada of losing the right to own practically any firearms.
It's pretty crazy out there.
Yes. So, from the point of view of wildlife, etc., wonderful places to go to, but politically, no, we're slightly better off here. But
quite possibly. Afghanistan. Afghanistan used to have one of the biggest migratory bird populations in the world. They've shot quite a few of them.
Yes, I didn't know that, but it doesn't surprise me because of where it is.
Yeah, quite interesting. I did a load of research for a video that you may already have seen. It's not done yet, Nick, just so you know. I'm speaking to the future here.
Yes, of course.
It all started because I watched a video of a guy in an Afghan gun market where a Bakel single barrel was $1,000. Oh. It hurt me. Mm. So I took one out and shot it just to see if I was missing something.
You weren't?
No.
God, spiteful things.
Oh, it was horrific.
In fact, my first gun I ever had was a Bakel single barrel.
It definitely breaks clays, and I imagine in a pinch it would be really handy to feed yourself.
Yes, super full choke.
Oh yeah.
Made of old T-36 tanks, or whatever they are, 32, whatever it was. 34s, thank you, one or the other. Apparently they weren't, but...
that's a good rumour.
Yes.
I think that's a sales pitch. I'd definitely linger on that. Yes,
just as an aside, I have no connection with Bakel, and I no longer own or shoot a Bakel gun, but I have in the past. The quality of...
Good for you, Nick.
The quality of steel of Bakels is exceptional.
Oh, they are not bad.
No.
There's nothing bad you can say about the steel.
Yes, the classic case being a trial that they did, Bask was involved in at Trivenham, through the good offices of, I can't remember his name, and they did things like put 2 cartridges into a gun, bury it, push it into the mud,
boom,
and fire it, with a length of string kind of thing. More than a few guns practically disintegrated, but all of your favourite B brands all survived with flying colours.
Bakel, Browning and Beretta.
And Beretta, including the one test where they did the old classic trick of putting a 20-bore cartridge and then a 12-bore cartridge on top of it.
Just shot it out
and the Bakel just spat it out.
I mean, when you make a barrel that thick.
Yes.
What I find funny about it though is the chamber is just as thick as the barrel. It's like a one-size-fits-all. Yeah,
yes. Well, wonderfully kind of examples of Russian engineering. Yes, they go bang.
They're not nice. They do work.
No.
And that counts for something.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just cock my leg off the back of my political high horse for a moment.
Jolly good.
And hope that I haven't said anything that's going to have MI5 knocking on my doorstep, on my door. But I
I'll
don't.
edit the bit out about rioting, coups, uprisings.
I
You
think
didn't know that.
no, but again, sadly I can see that this is something that is probably going to happen in many parts of the world before too much longer.
I mean, I hope you're around to see it.
I hope I'm wrong.
Me too, to be fair.
Yes.
I think that we're all too damn lazy and complacent. Welcome to the TGS Politics Show. I think we're all too damn lazy and complacent nowadays to even think about it. I think America would probably handle a civil war well, but in England we are definitely not of the sort anymore.
No, there is a. I mean, of course, once upon a time, this was regarded as being extreme. We'll say right wing. I'm never quite sure of the why they select that particular terminology. But it was always seen as right-wing conspiracy theorist type of ground to even talk about things like that. But of course, as time has progressed, it's become more and more real. You know, both Canada and New Zealand were Marxist empires. You couldn't leave your house in New Zealand because of the COVID restrictions, which were so draconian.
You couldn't leave your house in England either.
But you could, under certain circumstances.
If you had a dog, yeah.
Yes, I know, but the New Zealand ones were even worse. I think the worrying thing is that many people have grown accustomed to being treated like that by our governments, and we've got governments now interfering in areas of life and the world on a day-to-day basis that got nothing to do with them. Absolutely nothing.
I think you missed your calling.
Sorry, what, as an angry old man?
You finally found out what you were meant to do your entire life.
No, I just like being left alone, and I like being left to make decisions about my life, because I'm quite capable of making them. I don't need a government to do it. Yeah, well, if I cock up, that's my problem.
Well, on that positive note, Nick, it was an awesome morning. I know we didn't shoot anything, or in fact see anything at all.
No.
That was done then.
Yeah, dire, absolutely dire. As we said, I've got a boat now. It's all ready to rock and roll. Nice little seaworthy thing. Literally everything is in tip-top working order. Every time I've contemplated going out in it, either I've been ill, I know you weren't well for a while, the weather's not cooperated with some of the gales we had previously. Let's try and work towards a meshing of those things next year, and for God's sake, I will put you in the way of some bloody wildfowl shooting.
Should I bring a duck with us next time?
Well, yes, you could do. I mean, I've got a load of plastic ones we can sit and look at, and in the half light with one of these wind-driven spinning wing things, you could actually be forgiven that there's some real ones there. I've got a call. I can sound like a duck.
We'll make the best video you've ever seen. Nick, thank you very much. As always, this year has been, well, it's been a fun year. I'm glad you've had a good wildfowling season, and our wildfowling foray for 2022-2023 season was equally as successful as every other one we've ever been on.
Yes, thank you. I will say no more.
I enjoy them. I enjoy not shooting anything. I enjoy the company. I enjoy not cleaning the gun when we get back. I enjoy the whole process.
Yes, I mean, as you know earlier, I made the mistake of, because I've got to go home very shortly. When I get home, I will be greeted by my wife, to whom I've spoken on the phone before we started filming this. The dog, which I managed to get the worst of the clag off of when we came off of the marsh, but is still significantly plastered in mud, has managed to bash the bedroom door, which it's got a latch on it, but he knows that if he hits it hard enough, it'll open. And she's come home to find the dog on the bed. and a brand new Egyptian cotton bedspread purchased from a well-known and very expensive emporium in Chichester the other day is no longer white.
Well, imagine Egyptian cotton mixed with Hampshire
Clag and clay. Yes.
What a beautiful combination. You could sell that for more. Sell it back to them.
I'm sure the pattern is astonishing, but I sadly know that when I get in, I am going to get roasted. It's going to be hell.
If you need a safe space, Nick,
think of me.
I'm here for you. Thank you very much, mate.
Cheers, mate. All the best.
Thank you for watching, guys. This channel is made possible by our amazing sponsors. You can find out more about them in the description down below. And if you want to support the channel, you can join as a member. You get loads of extra content, well, some extra content, and occasionally we hook up and go clay shooting together as a membership group. If you don't feel like joining today, we really appreciate you watching and subscribing. Have a wonderful day.